Report for April 25th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. Our rundown could be the curriculum for a semester of law school. The main action was at the Supreme Court, weighing when and why an ex-president can be prosecuted. Where's the line? A president must be free to act, but not above the law. Donald Trump's case was at issue, but all 237 years of the history of the presidency were up for discussion. Said Justice Gorsuch, we're writing a rule for the ages. Yes, but what does that mean for Donald Trump's criminal case? That was also the question about the testimony in a New York courtroom Thursday. Former National Enquirer ally David Pecker detailed how he turned the tabloid into an arm of the 2016 Trump campaign. Unindicted co-conspirator 1 is how new Arizona indictments refer to the former president. They detail an alleged 2020 fake elector scheme to overturn the election. And in other overturning news, the top court in New York overturned producer Harvey Weinstein's New York sex crimes conviction, saying he didn't receive a fair trial. Can those without Hollywood money fight back if they're wronged? 10 years after the Flint water crisis, we sent a correspondent to see if the residents there think they've been treated justly. And we've got stories about issues sure to show up in court. New regulations on coal plant emissions, FCC rules for the internet, opioid liability. And in the absence of law, there's only war. Deborah Pata covers an aid worker risking everything in Gaza. And we'll build on Wednesday night's conversation on national security threats with author David Sanger. And finally, a Japanese skier flew more than the length of 3 football fields, smashing the existing record. Or did he? The lawyers are involved in that one, too. We'll explain why. The Daily Report begins in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with a historic and consequential argument before the Supreme Court. Justices will soon rule on Donald Trump's claim that presidents are immune from criminal prosecution for acts taken in office. The case centers around Trump and whether he acted in an official capacity when he attempted to overturn the 2020 presidential election on and before January 6, 2021. Special counsel Jack Smith says a president's constitutional duty is to faithfully execute the laws, not violate them. The discussion from justices on both ideological sides reached back to the very founding of the American system. Here's liberal Justice Elena Kagan.
Framers did not put an immunity clause into the Constitution. They didn't provide immunity to the president. And, not so surprising, they were reacting against a monarch who claimed to be above the law. Wasn't the whole point that the president was not a monarch and the president was not supposed to be above the law?
For more, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, what did you make of the debate today?
Well, this is indeed a consequential and important argument that went on today. I think that, it's very interesting how there are 2 looming issues. One is how will this affect Jack Smith's prosecution of the former president? And the other that many of the justices want to focus on is what are the implications for the presidency in the future?
And those seem like they're on 2 different timelines because at times, the justices, and particularly the conservative justices, seem to be saying, sure, the details of this case, but we're talking about for all time here. And they seem to be making a distinction between public acts and private acts. Why is that a significant distinction for them?
Well, it seemed like almost all of the justices, if not all of them, were about to reject the former president's claim that presidents have absolute immunity and were more interested in drawing a line between official acts, which they believe that presidents should have immunity for so that they are not hampered in making their decisions, and private acts that don't deserve that kind of immunity.
And so could they, the justices, it seemed, let's say there's maybe a conservative support for sort of making this distinction more clear. How, if there was that, where would that go? How does that? What is the next step in the situation?
That is a question that remains. So, is this an answer that will eat up time, delay the proceedings such that there will be no chance to really prosecute to the finality the former president? Or will the prosecutors be able to go forward with some kind of compromise where perhaps they drop some of the arguably official acts that the president is charged with and proceed with the ones that are clearly private in nature?
And one of the arguments that the Department of Justice was making is there are already accommodations in law to make sure that a president isn't railroaded. I mean, there was a lot of hypotheticals about, well, how could this be used in the wrong hands? What did you make of that argument from the Department of Justice? So
the Department of Justice was trying to suggest we don't need presidential immunity because there are built in already in the laws kind of defenses. For instance, you could claim an advice of counsel defense, and for a lot of official acts, a president will have consulted the Department of Justice, the Office of Legal Counsel, and gotten a legal opinion that what they are proceeding to do is lawful. And so that would form a defense that would, in Jack Smith's argument, would protect them in the future. And so they wouldn't need this kind of immunity. Is there an obligation for the justices to deal with the fact that there's a live case sitting in front of them, or does all of this talk about making decisions for all eternity allow them to point their eyes to the horizon and not have to really worry about this timeline question you already mentioned? Yeah, no, of course they are constrained by the case in front of them, but how they decide that case, they have a lot of leeway for doing that. So they can decide in a very narrow way that addresses just the issues that are before them, or they can decide in a broader way that has bigger implications for cases that come in the future, or for the presidency and how it's conducted in the future. All right. CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roife, thank you so much. Thank you. In Mr. Trump's New York criminal trial, the former head of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, was back on the stand. Michael George has a recap of the day's events.
Donald Trump began his day with a campaign stop. Before heading to the courthouse, the former president greeted supporters at a Manhattan construction site and complained about his treatment in court.
They've taken my constitutional right away with a gag order. That's all it is. It's election interference.
From there, it was back to his criminal trial, where the former president is accused of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. David Pecker returned to the witness stand. The longtime tabloid publisher said he worked with Trump to buy damaging stories and then squash them during the 2016 presidential race. He said when Daniels was selling her story, he turned it down, but that he told Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, that he should buy it and take it off the market. Prosecutors say the so-called catch-and-kill scheme was a crime.
The reason the government says it's illegal was because it was done specifically to influence the 2016 election. Keep information from the public.
The former president said this about Pecker.
David's been very nice. He's a nice guy.
Prosecutors say that was a message to Pecker and another violation of the judge's gag order. Trump, who's pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts, will be back in court on Friday when Pecker returns to the stand. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman joins me now. Pecker talked about the fact that Donald Trump thanked him after the election, invited him to the White House. Why was that important?
That's important because it shows that Trump felt like he sort of owed David Pecker a thank you. There was a meeting at Trump Tower he talked about where he thanked him for the Karen McDougal and the doorman story. And then when Pecker went to the White House, he brought his business associates, and all of them took pictures at the Oval Office with Trump. And he also talked about how they walked to dinner past the Rose Garden together. Trump wanted a private conversation with him, and he asked about how Karen McDougal was doing. Another thing that Pecker brought up is that he said Trump's family was never mentioned during the conversations about these stories, because Trump's team has really tried to paint this as Trump did this to not embarrass his family. And Pecker said his understanding was this was really all about the campaign. Ivanka and Melania were never mentioned in these conversations.
I want to follow up on that. Leaving aside the question of stories that would hurt Donald Trump, there is also a lot that Pecker's testified to about an arrangement they had where basically Pecker would make up out of whole cloth stories about Trump's opponents in the primary, really grim, awful stories, to help Trump, and then Trump on the trail, having covered him, used those stories to beat up those opponents.
Yeah, he was talking about this the other day, specifically stories about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio that really were essentially fabricated at points when they were doing well in the polls. So it was really an orchestrated arrangement between Pecker and Cohen were dealing with each other in the campaign.
And then finally, the examination of Pecker. Are they poking any holes in his story so far?
Absolutely. I mean, for one, they're trying to show how long ago all this happened and just poke holes in his timeline and the way that you remember conversations. But the other thing they're trying to show is that the prosecution's whole thing is they're saying that dating back to this August 2015 meeting, they devised this catch and kill scheme. But what Emile Beauvais, Trump's attorney, was saying is that they've actually been doing this for a long time, that I think as long as 17 years before that meeting, Pecker was tipping Trump off about problematic stories, and that he did this with other politicians and celebrities. Tiger Woods was one of them. So they're trying to say that it's not just this incident, this was just a business practice of his.
Right, not about the campaign, but just regular business.
Exactly.
Interesting business to be in. Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now to Arizona, the fourth state to charge residents with trying to overturn Joe Biden's 2020 election victory through the use of fake electors. A little reminder, the presidential candidate who wins a state's vote receives that state's electors, which make up the Electoral College. It's their votes that Congress certifies to formally elect the president. In 2020, after Donald Trump lost at the ballot box, an alleged scheme was devised in 7 of the states that President Biden won to substitute lawful electors for Joe Biden with a slate that would vote for Donald Trump. An Arizona grand jury indicted 11 people who signed on as fake electors. Among the charges, conspiracy, forgery, and fraud. The group includes 2 state senators and the state's former Republican Party chair. The former president is an unindicted co-conspirator, but many in his circle were charged. Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, also indicted Christina Bobb, the current head of election integrity at the Republican National Committee. A New York appeals court has overturned the 2020 rape conviction of disgraced Hollywood movie producer Harvey Weinstein. The state's top court ruled that Weinstein didn't receive a fair trial, which his lawyers echoed at a press conference Thursday afternoon.
There are some people who are very unpopular in our society, but we still have to apply the law fairly to them.
In a 4-3 decision, the Court of Appeals found that the trial judge made a mistake, allowing prosecutors to call witnesses who accused Weinstein of sexual assault but weren't part of the charges against him. One of Weinstein's accusers called the results unfair.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal. And our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence.
Weinstein will remain in prison regardless, as his 2020 California sex crimes conviction still stands. A 4th temporary channel has opened in the Port of Baltimore, the largest so far. It will only be open for 4 days, but it's deep and wide enough to allow ships trapped in the port to leave. Commercial ships will also be able to come in. Several ships have been stranded after the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed after being hit by a cargo ship that ran out of power 1 month ago. More than 200 days of Israel's war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip has left a trail of destruction. Women and children have made up around 2/3 of those killed in Palestinian territory, and we'll have more details ahead. Plus, capturing carbon emissions and turning them into something concrete, a process being used in some New York City buildings. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I use sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm
choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in China saying things they don't want to hear about the country's trade policies and economic practices. During a meeting in Shanghai with top Chinese officials, Blinken called on the country to level the playing field for American businesses in order to create healthy economic competition. This comes after President Biden last week suggested tripling tariffs on Chinese steel and after Congress passed legislation to force the Chinese owner of TikTok to sell the app. Tensions between the U.S. and China have also been exacerbated by China's support for Russia in its war with Ukraine. Blinken will be in Beijing Friday, where he's expected to meet with his Chinese counterpart and possibly President Xi Jinping. Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry has formally resigned. A new 9-member transitional council was inaugurated after Henry stepped down Thursday. A former Haitian economy and finance minister has been appointed as interim prime minister until a new government is formed. Haiti has been overrun by chaos and gang violence in recent weeks. Gangs launched coordinated attacks in the capital and surrounding areas back in February. Consulting firm McKinsey is under criminal investigation for its work with some of the nation's largest opioid manufacturers. The Justice Department is looking into McKinsey's advice to Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, and other drug makers on marketing strategies to boost sales of prescription painkillers. The firm has previously said that its advice was legal. According to the CDC, nearly 645,000 people died from overdoses involving opioids from 1999 to 2021. Rule has been restored to the internet. The Federal Communications Commission voted Thursday to bring back net neutrality regulations. Net neutrality says internet service providers must treat all online traffic equally. It blocks these companies from selectively speeding up, slowing down, or blocking the internet for users who aren't willing to pay extra for premium services. The rules were first established by the Obama administration in 2015. 2 years later, former President Donald Trump repealed them, arguing they're unnecessary and remove incentives for innovation. Residential energy use is responsible for 20% of total greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S., according to UC Davis. But one company is helping residential buildings reduce their impact and put carbon to use. Our Bradley Blackburn shows us how it works.
Deep in the basement of a New York City apartment building.
These are the boilers.
These massive devices generate heat and hot water for hundreds of residents.
This runs on natural gas.
Ryan Aspero with Carbon Quest says burning that fuel creates carbon dioxide. It would normally go out the chimney, but here's
the carbon capture room.
Their system captures CO2 before it's released in the air.
This tank holds 700 gallons of liquefied carbon dioxide. That's equivalent to about 3 tons of CO2.
The maze of pipes and tanks fills a room, but it's actually small scale. Most carbon capture happens at large industrial plants. Aspero believes bringing the technology down to this size is critical to fighting climate change.
This takes up about 800 square feet in a 400,000 square foot building.
More cities like New York are rolling out restrictions on building emissions, but changing an entire heating system to electric is difficult.
For buildings that use natural gas boilers, carbon capture is a cost-effective and easy solution to implement without a major disruption.
From the basement, the CO2 is pumped out and taken by truck to Glenwood Mason in Brooklyn.
It's the exact duplicate tank.
VP Jeff Hansen says every day this factory churns out some 40,000 concrete blocks. They now inject CO2 in the slurry before blocks are formed to be stored forever.
Every one of these blocks has carbon locked up inside. Every single one of them.
Using these blocks can help projects meet new green construction requirements. Carbon captured in a full cycle, showing how one building's waste can help build a greener future.
And for more on this, I'm joined on set by our Bradley Blackburn. Bradley, I guess, do we call these carbonated cinder blocks? That sounds like they might be made by LaCroix. But how are carbonated cinder blocks different than, say, traditional ones?
Well, functionally, John, they're exactly the same. So, in fact, the company says that, if anything, they're a little bit stronger than traditional blocks. But the point here is really about the green potential. That's why they're doing it. At Glenwood Mason out there, they're no longer making traditional blocks. Everything that comes off that line that you saw has carbon locked inside. And what it offers to architects and builders is that it helps them achieve certain standards, like to get LEED certification. And so that's why this one builder of blocks is moving in this direction.
And so LEED certification is one prestigious thing. How does it help financially? I mean, what's the financial benefit for those who might use it or otherwise?
Yeah, when you look at an individual building, whether they would choose to install it down in the basement on their own boiler, really there's a carrot here and there's a stick. So the carrot is that buildings that are green are more appealing to tenants or to owners in a lot of cases. So there's a marketing aspect to this. And Carbon Quest also says that their system, because buildings can share in the profit from selling their carbon dioxide, over time it helps pay for itself. Now, the stick part is interesting, and it's all about regulation. So here in New York City, they're introducing one of the toughest laws in the country to decarbonize buildings. By 2030, it aims to reduce emissions by 40% in residential buildings. And so what will happen is over the next few years, any carbon dioxide over that limit will be charged at, I think it's $268 per ton. Now, that adds up quick. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars per year, maybe more. Yeah. And so buildings are looking at ways to cut their footprint. It's still a question. I mean, the law really is driving buildings to electrify, so there's a question of whether this kind of carbon capture technology will help meet those requirements.
Are there other customers for liquefied carbon dioxide?
Yeah, that was my big question in reporting this story, because this Glenwood Mason is using carbon dioxide at about the same rate that this one building is producing it. So if you scale this up, you need a lot more customers, right? And there are other clients, certainly other concrete makers or construction projects. You mentioned carbonated, right? I mean, this is carbonated water. It's the same stuff that goes into soda. That's another potential client. There are also industrial clients in hospital settings, that kind of thing. But really, this company that's marketing this says it's not just for residential buildings. It could be applied anywhere. There are big boiler systems. So think schools, hospitals, other institutions, all that might want to reduce their footprint, John.
Very cool, Bradley Blackburn. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
A new EPA rule could mark the end of coal power in America. If that sounds dramatic, the new rule requires coal-fired power plants to cut or capture 90% of smokestack emissions or shut down by the year 2039. The Environmental Protection Agency says the new standards will prevent more than 1 billion metric ton of carbon pollution through 2047, the equivalent to the annual emissions of 328 million gas cars. It's the most ambitious effort yet from the Biden administration to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector, which is the nation's second largest contributor to climate change behind transportation. Biden pledged in 2021 to remove carbon pollution from the energy sector by 2035 and economy-wide by 2050. Now to a record-breaking ski jump. Before I throw cold water on it, just look at this. Kobayashi shot down a specially made ramp that launched him, he's still going, around 955 feet, still going. He was in the air for about 10 seconds and broke the record by 131 feet. However, the International Ski and Snowboard Federation says it won't recognize the Red Bull-sponsored jump because it wasn't made under competition conditions. Regardless, Kobayashi will have a shot at the official world record at the FIS World Cup next winter. It's a good thing he's had practice. It's been 10 years since the water crisis in Flint, Michigan began. The federal government says work is ongoing. But what do residents say? CBS News spoke with some of them. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The Supreme Court heard arguments Thursday in the case revolving around whether former President Trump is immune from prosecution for actions taken while he was in office. A A decision on Trump's immunity claim could be critical in his ongoing 2020 election interference case. In another one of Trump's legal battles, a federal judge has denied his bid for a new trial in the civil suit from writer E. Jean Carroll. She was awarded more than $83 million in January after a jury found Trump liable for defamation. While Trump called the damages out of proportion, the judge disagreed. A New York appeals court has ordered a new trial for Harvey Weinstein after overturning his 2020 rape conviction. The court found the judge who presided over the case made an error when allowing prosecutors to call witnesses whose accusations were not a part of the charges. The Pentagon says the construction has started on a pier that will deliver aid to Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel is intensifying its strikes on Rafah ahead of a possible ground offensive. Deborah Pata shows us the destruction from the war in the territory and tells the story of an aid worker who's risking it all to help others. And we want to warn you, some of the images are disturbing.
For more than 200 days, Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinians have endured relentless Israeli bombardment. More than 34,000 people have been killed, mostly women and children. Infrastructure has been all but destroyed, and a crippling humanitarian crisis grips the territory. Images over the weekend of tiny Sabrina Al-Roo, born 10 weeks too early, fighting for her life after being saved from her dying mother's womb in Rafah, prompted fresh global outrage. This is beyond warfare, said the UN. The UN Population Fund's Dominic Allen has just returned from Gaza. He visited Al-Shifa and Nasser Hospital, before the war, the two largest and most advanced hospitals in Gaza. All that's left of them now, the remnants of a battlefield.
And we saw equipment, ultrasounds and other types of equipment which was going to help save lives, with purposeful destruction, screens that are smashed, cables that have been cut.
Of particular concern are pregnant women, around 5,000 expected to give birth in the coming month alone.
There's the fear. We hear from pregnant women who are scared for their own lives and their babies' lives. Where will they be able to give birth safely?
Amidst this hellscape, aid workers are also racing to ward off famine stalking Gaza, trying to get food, water and medicine to those in dire need. Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world for those providing humanitarian services. Nearly 250 aid workers have been killed in this war.
Working in a situation where there is no ceasefire and there is a continuous pumping, continuous shelling over your heads while you are working with those people, for sure it's really difficult.
And yet every day, 29-year-old Oxfam worker Khaloud Jawafla heads off to do this difficult, dangerous work.
Because we believe that humanitarian workers, it's one of our responsibilities.
Together with organizations like the UN, Oxfam is helping distribute life-saving food and water, and hygiene kits for women living in dusty tent camps where even the most basic sanitation is a long-forgotten luxury. When work is done, Jawafla never quite knows what she will come home to. Her 2-year-old son Samir and her husband Yusuf constantly on her mind when she's in the field.
All the time trying to call them, trying to text them to make sure that they are safe.
It is not easy to leave work behind and forget the stories of devastation and loss that she spends her day listening to.
I'm trying to calm myself because I don't want to go back to home holding all these tragedies with me, because I want to go back to home trying to care about my child.
An almost impossible balancing act for this young mother, making her son feel secure in a place she knows is anything but safe.
And Deborah Pata joins me now from East Jerusalem. What a story, Deborah. With Gaza, it seems like it just can't get any worse, and then it just keeps getting worse. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seems quite determined to press ahead with the invasion of Rafah. So what's going to happen when that happens?
Well, John, that is, of course, what has many global leaders and aid organizations really worried. The latest being the G7, which said a Rafah invasion would have catastrophic consequences if it went ahead. It's been said so often, but I think it bears repeating over and over again that more than half of Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah. Some of them have fled multiple times in this war, and they pressed right up against that border with Egypt. This was supposed to be their last stop. And you saw the levels of destruction on our report. There is nowhere to go, and there is nothing to go to. Parts of Gaza are unrecognizable, and into this mix is the fact that the World Food Programme said this week that half of Gaza's population is starving. Not on the brink of starvation, they are starving. And even with more aid coming in, it's a drop in the ocean. Now, if that invasion goes ahead, it is going to hamper aid work, which is still problematic, still being held up, still having difficulty reaching the north and the areas where there is the most dire need. And yet Benjamin Netanyahu has brushed off these global concerns, John. And, as always, he's hell-bent going it alone and seems to be pressing ahead and giving indications that that could happen anytime soon. So there's real fear for those people in Rafah right now, John.
Hamas is still holding Israeli hostages in Gaza somewhere. Has there been any progress, or where do things stand with respect to the negotiations for the release of those hostages as it stands right now?
Well, yesterday we saw a Hamas propaganda video surface. It showed 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg-Pollen speaking with an amputated arm. That was an injury he sustained during the October 7th attack, trying to protect friends. This really has given renewed hope to many of the families of the hostages that there are more hostages alive. And remember, we were talking about the Rafah invasion. There are also over 100 hostages inside Gaza, families desperately hoping that they come back. So that video really sparked some kind of hope. It also sparked furious protests outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence. These families of those in captivity feel that he's failed them, so much so that the protest ended in pretty violent clashes with police. But again today, we heard that there are more discussions around a deal. I feel like I've said that so often since this war started, that there are more discussions. But I spoke to the mother of Hirsch Goldberg-Pollen, and she said a very powerful thing, John, that there are hundreds of thousands of innocent people suffering in Gaza, and one of them, she said, I know very well. His name is Hirsch, and this is enough. It's time for this to end for everyone.
Deborah Pata in East Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Deborah. The University of Southern California is canceling its main stage graduation ceremony amid a wave of protests against the Israel-Hamas war. Students have been making their voices heard from California to New Jersey. There you see video from UCLA, Princeton, UT Austin, and Temple University in Philadelphia. Many are calling for their colleges to divest funds from Israeli military operations, while some Jewish students report they're scared for their safety on campus. Hundreds of protesters throughout the country have been arrested. 10 years ago, a water crisis began when the city of Flint, Michigan, switched to the Flint River for its municipal water supply. The more corrosive water was not treated properly, allowing lead from pipes to reach into many homes. Usher Qureshi went to Flint to speak with residents about what the past decade has been like.
An American city sickened by its own drinking water.
These are all your medications?
Yeah, I was, prior to 2015, January of 2015, I was on one multivitamin every day.
How many pills do you take a day?
I take 15 prescribed pills every day.
Melissa Mays became one of Flint's loudest voices. She's among tens of thousands still waiting to see any payment from a $626 million class action settlement for their exposure.
We're trying to be civil, and yet no one's in jail. The pipes aren't replaced. The yards aren't fixed. We don't have health care. Basically, what we were told was that it's okay to poison us. We don't matter.
Trouble began when the city, in economic freefall, disconnected its water supply from Detroit's system and began drawing from the Flint River instead. It was a bid to shave millions off the city's budget. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimated 100,000 people were exposed when the corrosive chemicals used to decontaminate Flint River water allowed lead from the pipes into faucets. At least 12 people died from Legionnaire's disease, brought on by bacteria in that water. Results from children's blood tests were a red flag for one pediatrician.
There is no safe level of lead.
By summer 2015, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha discovered that the number of children with dangerous levels of lead in their blood doubled.
That is the moment my life changed. As a pediatrician, we know what lead does. It's damning. It is a potent, irreversible neurotoxin. There's no safe level. It erodes cognition. It twists behavior. It can alter the life course of a child, and worse, it can alter the life course of a population of children.
Dr. Hanna-Attisha is now the Associate Dean for Public Health at Michigan State University's College of Human Medicine.
It's pretty stunning that to this day we continue to use the bodies of our kids as detectors of environmental contamination.
She estimated some 14,000 children in Flint may have been exposed.
Almost like it was some sort of a pandemic that Flint had been through.
James Prue joined a class action lawsuit after his 8-year-old daughter was exposed.
She had a certain amount of lead in her system.
When you found that out, that she had lead in her blood, what did you think?
There's learning disabilities that go along with it, so I thought, she's going to be out for a tough future.
I am sorry, and I will fix it.
Then Governor Rick Snyder was among 9 current and former Michigan officials charged criminally 7 years after the crisis began. But the cases collapsed after the state Supreme Court said the charges were brought improperly by a one-judge grand jury.
There is lead in the drinking water, but it's considered below federal safety limits. The population here has dropped by about 20,000 over the past decade, but it's still fresh in the minds of people we met. Has it faded at all from the forefront of the minds of people in this community?
I would say no. It's not all the way healed. We can still see construction going on with pipes and things like that.
In 2015, at age 8, Mari Kopany, crowned Little Miss Flint, became an activist. Now 16, she's frustrated by inaction.
Have things gotten better?
No. Honestly, we still don't have clean water. Isn't that so crazy? Isn't that so crazy? We haven't had clean water, and it is 2024.
What would you like to see happen?
Getting clean water, finally. Getting our lead, getting our pipes fixed.
We can't recover until the water coming through our pipes stops hurting us, until it's actually clean and safe for everyone in Flint. And that's not happening.
And Usher Qureshi joins me now. Usher, what does the federal government have to say about whether or not the water is safe to drink?
Well, we posed that very simple question to the U.S. EPA asking, is the water in Flint safe? And a lot of residents would hope that the answer would be seemingly simple as well. What we got in response from the EPA was that a lengthy response that talked about testing, retesting, compliance, and investment in infrastructure. But nowhere in that lengthy response was the word yes.
Usher Qureshi, thank you for your reporting. It's been 35 years since the Cold War ended. Many in the U.S. thought we'd never see another one. I'll speak to the author of a new book who argues we're not only facing a new Cold War, we're facing more than one. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When President Biden released his administration's national security strategy, he declared that, quote, the post-Cold War era is definitively over and a competition is underway between major powers. It's that acknowledgement that was, in part, behind the $95 billion aid bill Biden signed Wednesday, sending money to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, three nations fighting off threats from three of those major powers Biden warned about a year and a half ago. A former National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, explained to us Wednesday that U.S. support is coming in a package because the conflicts are too.
It's so clear now, John, the degree to which this axis of aggressors are aiding and abetting each other. With material support, the drones and the missiles that Iran is providing to Russia. Russia is in turn providing all kinds of support for Iran. And then, of course, China's in the act, too.
And David Sanger joins me now. He is the author of the now New York Times best-selling book, New Cold Wars, China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West. David, it's good to be with you. Before we get to the present, I want to talk about the past, as you outlined so well in your book. You write about how Western governments, especially America, consistently underestimated or misunderstood the intentions of China. Explain that a little bit. Was it lack of information, naivete, or something else?
You know, it was a little bit of poor intelligence, but mostly, I think, John, it was wishful thinking. You know, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we saw that Russia was in an unsteady democratization and that China was on the rise. And it was the determined thinking of the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and others. You and I were covering some of this at the time, those White Houses, that China was experimenting with democracy, would join Western institutions. That's why the U.S. guided them into the World Trade Organization. And that over time, it would essentially decide that becoming part of the Western system was more important than territory, more important than worrying about Taiwan, really more important than repressing dissent at a time that we saw a pretty robust, if not fully free press, but independent press underway in China.
Now let's turn to Russia. If you could pinpoint a moment when the miscalculation took place with Putin, where would you put your finger?
You know, I might put my finger, John, of all strange places, on an evening in 2002 when President Bush and Laura Bush and Putin and his then wife were floating down the Neva River outside of St. Petersburg. Bush had gone to get help in counterterrorism. This was shortly after 9/11. And the two were talking about joining the European Union, maybe one day Russia joining NATO, the alliance that had been set up to contain the old Soviet Union. and they were being served dinner, John, by this sort of hulking guy in the background. And when I went back and dug out the pictures, sure enough, it was Prigozhin, the man who later went on to try to fix the 2016 election and start the Wagner Group to go help invade Ukraine.
Now, let's move to the present. This aid package that President Biden just signed. What do you think? Is that a sign that there is now a catch-up in thinking from what you detail at the beginning of your book in terms of an understanding of what the nature of the great power competition is?
I think that catch-up in thinking was going on even in the Trump administration, not necessarily with President Trump, but some of his advisors, including one you just showed, H.R. McMaster, who turned out a national security strategy that tried to steer the United States back toward great power competition, away from eras of counterterrorism. But in the Biden administration, they really crashed into it, John. And, it's Congress, and particularly this group within the Republican Party that wanted to pull back, that seemed to be stepping on the brakes a bit on that. Now, they've come through, and that money will go not only to Ukraine, but to Taiwan. It will go not only to Taiwan, but also to Israel and to the Palestinians. But I think the process was so rough getting there that there are many people wondering whether or not that's repeatable, particularly if a Trump administration comes in.
David Sanger, the author of the New York Times bestseller, New Cold Wars. Thank you so much, David.
Great to be with you, John.
Still to come, before climbing into a gondola at sunset, cough up some cash. Why Venice is implementing an entrance fee for some tourists and how much it will cost day trippers. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
Chicago Bears will be the first team on the clock during tonight's NFL draft. The first round takes place in Detroit, and it'll be followed up with second and third rounds tomorrow night, then the remaining rounds on Saturday. USC quarterback Caleb Williams is widely expected to be the first player selected by the Bears with the #1 overall pick. Paris is mourning the mysterious loss of what makes it one of the most iconic landmarks. Makes one of the most iconic landmarks special, I should say. The Moulin in the Moulin Rouge. The windmill sails fell to the ground overnight, but it's unclear exactly why. The collapse, which the venue's director says was caused by a technical problem, also took down the first 3 letters on the marquee. No one was hurt, though, and the audience had already left by the time the pieces fell off of the 135-year-old monument. The owner says the show will go on, but no word yet on a repair timeline, with just 3 months before Olympians arrive in town. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that'll be €5, please. In a world first, the floating city of Venice is now charging day trippers the rough equivalent of $5.40 to enter. The program is meant to alleviate the pressure from mass tourism. While some locals applaud the idea, others say it won't help much and leaves the city feeling more like a theme park. So maybe that's not amore. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. The Supreme Court weighs presidential immunity amid several presidential trials. What justices are saying so far and what their decision could mean for Trump in court. Plus, the story of an aid worker in Gaza risking it all to help those suffering from war. We have a report from East Jerusalem. And what do emissions have to do with cinder blocks? How the latest carbon capture idea works. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.